Sometime in 2015, Paramount and Platinum Dunes planned to make a reboot of the Friday the 13th franchise after the failure of the requel in 2009. They hired David Bruckner to write and direct the movie. The original draft of the script was described as an 80s coming-of-age monster movie and was to be found footage. It's assumed that Paramount didn't like the script, and Hannibal creator Nick Antosca was to write a new script and have it be more of a typical slasher. David Bruckner was still the director of the project. According to Antosca, Platinum Dunes was very enthusiastic about the script, but Paramount was unsure. There was a change of higher-ups after he was hired, and they didn't want to do his script, so they fired both him and David Bruckner. Eventually, they got Crazy's director Breck Eisner to direct and Aaron Guzikowski to write. This version was called Friday the 13th Part 13 and was to take place at Camp Crystal Lake in 1977. The first two kills in the movie are performed by a man wearing a sack on his head, assumed to be Jason, but it's actually his father, Elias Voorhees. The first 40 minutes are focused on him until Pamela kills him in a fit of rage, and then the focus is on her, and she soon goes crazy after witnessing Jason die. Eventually, she's killed and Jason becomes the final killer of the movie. It was set to be released on Friday, May 13th in 2016, then changed to January 13th in 2017, and then finally October 13th, 2017, before it was finally canceled. While it is unknown what finally macheted the production, there were some factors that could account for it. One is that Paramount got cold feet and didn't want to do it. Another is due to the failure of rings that Paramount thought it couldn't work, or it could be the ongoing legal battle over the rights, prompted by Victor Miller, the original's writer. The script I have for you today, if you couldn't tell by the title, is the Antosca script he wrote before he was booted. He only wrote one draft, and it is dated June 4th, 2015. With that, let's get into it. It opens on Crystal Lake, the end of the summer. We see a foot of a dead lifeguard. Then we see a young teenager swimming over. It turns out she's not dead, and it was just a training exercise. The lifeguard is one of our main characters, Sloan Higgins, a camp counselor. The teen swims Sloan over to another one of the main characters and a counselor, Vanessa Fontanello, who's a total bombshell. Every counselor and kid is ogling over her. 3 counselors are looking at her doing the training exercise, and there are more of our main characters, Kevin Beamer, his brother Brad, and Weezer Samdahl. They talk about guy shit while also watching the kids. More counselors at the water's edge, and more of our main characters, Amber Jensen, Greg Widerhorn, and Kirby Butters, talking about sex. The head counselor, Ian Duckworth, is trying to get them to do more work. Amber leaves to do it. Cut back to the Beamers and Weezer talking about Vanessa. Brad goes after Amber. They start making out. Cut back to the lake. One of the kids goes under the rope boundary while all the other counselors are distracted. The kid, Andy, starts to drown. Brad and Amber stop their sesh, Kevin freezes, and Sloan and Vanessa go after them, even though they are very far away. Andy is struggling. Brad dives in. He's under, can't find him. Kevin is nervous. Back down again, and Brad gets Andy's unconscious body. Drags him to shore, he hacks up water, and he appears to be okay. Nurse looks him over, doesn't really care, but says he's fine anyway. Duckworth condemns Kevin, but Brad tells him it's not his fault, as he shouldn't have walked away despite saving his life. Kevin is shaken. We then see a location and date. Camp Crystal Lake, New Jersey, August 1988. Montage of the camp at dusk. We see the groundskeeper, Frank, is hacking a tree branch with a machete. The counselors are telling the kids to go to bed. Cut to someone lurking in the woods watching Vanessa. She undresses and gets ready for bed. The someone is a local guy named Dylan Faber. She is scared by his presence. They have a sarcastic little back and forth. Cut to someone smoking a joint. All the counselors are relaxing around a campfire with Dylan. They're all smoking and eating marshmallows. Greg toasts to a great summer and to Brad for saving the kid. Then, because of that, tells the story of Pamela Voorhees. Dylan tells the story instead, as Greg can't remember key details. They have the idea to go over to the original camp. Some agree, some don't, but they all eventually decide to go. Dylan thinks they shouldn't, but they think he's just joking. So the group, minus Weezer and Kirby, go. Brad and Kevin talk, and Brad thinks this is a good way for Kevin to get with Vanessa. They keep going until Frank stops them. He asks for Brad's joint, takes a drag, and decides to show them the camp himself. Kirby and Weezer go to bed. They're on the lake in 2 canoes. Kevin tries to get with Vanessa, but fails. They talk about the backstory more and how none of them are scared of some old lady. But Dylan still treats her like an actual threat. The other canoe, Frank talks about Mrs. Voorhees and the murders. as well as talking about her kid. They get to the other camp. Kevin screws it with Vanessa again. Greg tries to get a rise out of people, but Dylan and Frank know what happened and tell him to shut up. They are walking into the campgrounds. Kevin hears strange noises while Vanessa starts hiccuping. They then see an old rotting sign to Camp Crystal Lake. Frank states, "Welcome to Camp Crystal Lake." They see old decrepit cabins and rotting buildings. Greg is really drunk and high and acting like a damn fool. Everyone is amused, Frank the most so. They continue for a bit. Wind is picking up. Cut to Kirby reading. She notices something is wrong. Cut back to the group and they hear something break. They're all freaked out. But it's just a branch. Kevin is still trying to hit on Vanessa, but it's not working. They head towards the cabins and Frank lingers behind. He thinks he sees something in the darkness. Cut to an equipment shed. Brad, Amber, and Greg are looking around when Greg startles them with an old hockey mask. Cut to Sloan in an abandoned cabin with Dylan, Vanessa, and Kevin. Dylan continues to make the moves on Vanessa. She notices the cuts in the floorboards, while Sloan states they were murdered there. They see an old picture of Mrs. Voorhees' son. Sloan takes an old bracelet she finds. Vanessa and Dylan disappear. They go through the back of the cabin to look for them. They go closer and closer into the woods. They hear footsteps. They call for Greg. They hear him, but far away. They continue. Kevin sees a figure. They go back to the cabin, scared out of their minds. They get back to the site with everyone accounted for. Kevin says he saw someone, but they don't believe him. They realize Frank is gone. They find his unlit cigarette. They go to the docks, believing it was Frank pulling a prank, but they find one of the canoes missing. Again, they think it was Frank. They can't fit in the canoe, so Brad volunteers to walk and Dylan does as well. Then Vanessa decides to walk so Brad can stay with Amber, and so she can be with Dylan. Brad gives Kevin a sorry look. They go into the canoe and Brad vocally apologizes to Kevin. Greg starts going off on Frank, as well as being a drunk doofus. They find the other canoe floating in the lake, empty. They hear a shriek from shore. Kevin is worried. It starts to rain. Kevin thinks they should look for them, but they think it's nothing to worry about. They head to the cabins. Kevin hesitates but follows the group. There's something lurking in the darkness. Brad and Amber head into the girls' cabin. Kirby lets them do their thing. She goes with Sloan and they head across the grounds. Cut to the guys' cabin. Shooting the shit and Greg apologizes for being an asshole. Cut to the woods with Dylan and Vanessa. They're making out on the ground. They're about to do the devil's tango when Vanessa states she isn't that experienced and Dylan is sweet and forgiving about it. He asks her out and she agrees. She decides to head back. There's a figure in the woods. They go their separate ways. Cut back and forth between Dylan and Vanessa. Vanessa gets her leg caught in a bush. Dylan encounters someone. He falls on jagged rocks, tumbles, and lands, is bleeding, and has several broken bones. The figure catches up to him. Dylan shines the light on his face, screams, and cut to the camp. The rain, now very heavy, covers his screams. Vanessa reaches the camp as the sun rises. Cut to Weezer on top of a big water slide smoking a bowl at dawn. His daily ritual. He eventually returns back to the cabin. Kevin and Greg are in their beds, and Kirby and Sloan are on the floor, all sleeping. They're all hungover, except Kirby. Weezer gets out Kevin's porn stash. Cut to the girls' cabin. Amber and Brad are semi-nude in bed, and Vanessa gets up. She leaves to go to the showers while Amber and Brad do the devil's tango after the fact. Cut back to the guys' cabin, and everyone is reading Kevin's porn mags. Sloan and Kirby are judgmental, while the latter is fascinated as well. They continue to talk about sex. It's also revealed that Kevin is a virgin, unsurprisingly. He leaves. Vanessa is showering and she sees a figure watching her. She thinks it's Frank, but when she opens the stall door, no one is there. She leaves and goes back to the cabin, every turn expecting the figure, but we don't see anything. Vanessa keeps walking and we see someone behind her. It's Kevin. Vanessa shows him the muddy boot prints in the shower. They discuss and Kevin mentions the figure he saw. They continue to investigate, with Kevin getting excited to be hanging out with Vanessa. They look around camp and they see more muddy footprints by the window by the girls' cabin. Vanessa gets stung by a hornet on her foot, so she and Kevin go to the nurse. They have a kinda intimate moment. Cut to the parents driving up to get the kids from camp with Duckworth's voiceover. They're in the mess hall for a final assembly with everyone in attendance. Cut to the last car leaving. Duckworth has them get supplies from town so they can break the camp down. He proceeds to get high with the nurse. The counselors separate to get everything quicker. Cut to the police station with Sloane, Vanessa, and Kevin. The sheriff and deputies say they can't do anything in regards to the figure they saw. He mentions the theory that the Voorhees boy didn't die in the lake, and the trio aren't amused. They leave. Cut back to Duckworth and Nurse, and they're having a good time. We see someone in the window. Duckworth steals some of Weezer's weed. He goes back to see a figure, in Frank's clothes, looking into the window. He picks up a shovel. It cuts to the nurse, and we see signs of a struggle from the window. Cut to the figure dragging Duckworth into the woods with him struggling. He's extremely weak and bludgeoned. Tries to fight back when the figure lets him go. The figure then horrifically kills him with a shovel. The counselors are finishing up when the trio is visited by an eccentric lady named Linda King. She claims she knew Pam and her son and called the latter a nice kid. The counselors get back to camp. Evening sets in as Greg is hitting golf balls into the lake while wearing the hockey mask he found before. Kevin is eating with the girls at a picnic table nearby. Greg finishes up and throws the mask into the lake. He wants to make a bonfire, but the trio says no because of the figure they saw. Greg begrudgingly agrees, but he asks what the next course of action should be. They notice that Duckworth is missing. They suggest going into town, but Kevin has an idea with the fire. They get baseball bats, and the girls think it's ridiculous. Cut to them in the cabin with candles on the ground, with everyone smoking and drinking. They're talking about the killer and the murders. Brad and Amber leave to do the devil's tango. Kevin's pissed. It's 9:09 p.m. Vanessa gets worried since Dylan was supposed to pick her up by now. Cut to Brad and Amber. Amber doesn't want the relationship to continue after the summer, and Brad is devastated. He leaves the cabin, pissed. Amber tries to stop him, but can't. He goes to the guy's cabin, and she goes back to the girl's cabin. Cut back to the group. Kirby starts smoking, Vanessa is pissed, and Kevin starts to make a move. It goes a lot better than before. Sloane and Kirby are in an intense convo about Sloane being too reserved, and Kirby kisses her. Sloane is shocked and impressed, but not into it. Weezer and Greg are high, watching everyone. Vanessa and Kevin are kinda hitting it off, and Kevin kinda goes in to kiss her, but Vanessa jolts back. It's awkward and she goes to talk with the girls. Kevin feels like an idiot. Greg leaves and thinks the idea of this is dumb, and Weezer leaves with him. Someone is watching them leave. It's officially Friday. Greg goes to the cabin and Weezer goes to the lake to smoke a bowl. Sloane is sitting with Kirby and Vanessa, who are out cold. She decides to sit next to Kevin. Kevin is saddened, but Sloane tries to cheer him up. She kisses him. They start making out and Kevin gets to second base. They get up on the bed and trying to stay quiet, proceeding to do the devil's tango. The next morning, Vanessa wakes up and sees them naked in bed. She nods Kirby awake and she's shocked. Both are. They silently make it out of the cabin. They head to the girls' cabin. The machete that was by the tree stump isn't there anymore. Cut to Weezer at sunrise doing his dawn ritual with someone watching him. He takes one last bong rip and decides to go down the water slide. While going down, the machete blade stabs into the slide and Weezer can't stop. It cuts into his pelvis and is lodged in his hip bone. Blood everywhere. Screaming, trying to get off the slide. He does so and he starts going up. He sees the machete disappear and he's losing consciousness. Sloane jolts awake and Kevin wakes up because of it. She has had a nightmare and starts telling Kevin about it. She saw the boy who drowned in her dream, but he wasn't a boy anymore. He grew into a man somehow. She undoes the tension with a joke, and they get dressed and leave. Sloane goes to the girl cabin with a recently awakened Vanessa. They talk about last night. Cut to Kevin getting out of the cabin, refreshed and happy. He sees Brad by the campfire, alone and depressed. Brad states what happened. Kevin doesn't tell him and just gives his brother some necessary company. Cut to Sloane and Vanessa giggling over last night. Kirby wakes up and heads to the showers. Amber is coming back from the showers and chats with Brad and Kevin, the former of which is ignoring her, about Duckworth. Amber offers to go to the archery range and Kevin tells him to go while he starts to pack up. Amber thanks him. Kevin sees something floating in the lake. It's raw meat, as well as Weezer's bong. He's shocked and scarred. Girl cabin, Kevin bursts the door open. He yells at them to go down by the lake with him. Cut to them at the lake and Vanessa confirms that it's lungs. Greg comes over and sees the mess. More meat washes ashore and it's a human hand. Kevin sees something in the marshy grass. They go to check it out. It's Weezer's corpse. All are scared and hysterical beyond belief. They have to get out of there. They go to Duckworth's truck. They see Kirby. Kevin asks about the phone. It's still busted. Greg has the keys to the truck. Kevin then realizes that Brad and Amber are at the archery range. Cut to them. They're talking, with Amber trying to make up with Brad. Cut back to the group, and Kirby barely believes them. They have to get to them, and they have to get Duckworth's gun he has stashed in his desk drawer. They try to formulate a plan when Kirby sees a goalie. There he is, the killer, partially obscured by smoke. He leaves sight behind a cabin. Kevin wants to get the gun. The killer is coming closer, and Greg wants to leave, but Kevin and Sloan want to get the gun, and Brad and Amber. He's coming closer and closer. They start to scatter, and the killer goes for Greg, stabs him through the back. The gang stops running and begs him to stop, and obviously, he doesn't. Everyone is screaming. He unsheaths the blade, and he starts cutting into Greg's hands. The killer is done with him, and soon goes after Kirby. Vanessa and Sloan go after Greg to stop the bleeding. He slashes Kirby on the back. He goes back to Greg when he sees them messing with him, aka trying to treat his wounds. Cut to the nurse sleeping peacefully. Cut back to the action. Killer cuts Vanessa's palm when Kevin throws a rock at him to get his attention. He turns. Kevin throws another rock at him. He starts running after him. Kevin runs but can't get away. The killer grabs his foot and then swings him into a tree and then throws him away. Killer comes out to him. They stare each other down before the killer stabs Kevin right through the head. Kevin is dead. He looks around. Vanessa and Sloan are nowhere to be found, and Greg has been crawling away. He hears Kirby and goes after her. She gets into a canoe and pushes off. Killer throws a huge rock at her. It hits her shoulder and starts sinking the boat. Cut to Brad and Amber. They're finished packing everything up at the archery range. They've also made up and are friends again. Cut back to the camp. A boombox has been playing music this whole time. Wide shots of the camp. Greg has died from his wounds, and Kevin is still very dead. Killer breaks the boombox. Kirby is still alive and trying to stay out of sight on the floating deck. Sloan and Vanessa are in the back of the truck. They state they want to get the gun and the keys. Sloan wants the gun, and Vanessa wants the keys. They decide to get the gun, then the keys. They climb out of the truck cautiously. They reach the cabin when Vanessa starts to have an asthma attack, and Sloan manages to calm her down before it gets bad. They try to pry the lock open. They hear laughter, Brad and Amber coming back to camp. They have a cute back and forth. Amber goes to the mess hall while Brad throws out the targets. Sloan goes out to get them while Vanessa deals with the locked drawer. Brad notices the boombox destroyed. Thinks it's weird. He stokes the flames of the campfire. Brad notices Kirby on the floating deck and is about to yell to her when a hand clasps over his mouth. It's Sloan, and she tells him the situation. Cut to Amber in the mess hall getting breakfast ready. She notices some creepy sounds. Back to Vanessa. She eventually gets the drawer open and sees the gun has a trigger lock. Sloan tries to get Brad out of the open. She tells him that he killed Weezer, Greg, and Kevin. They see Kevin's body, and he tries to mourn, but Sloan needs to get him out of there. They go to the mess hall to get Amber. Brad and Sloan see her, and behind her is the killer. He stabs her through the shoulder, and she just kind of seems mildly irritated about it. Vanessa watches. Brad gets his attention away from Amber, and the killer starts to chase them. They circle around the cabins and back to the mess hall. Amber is in shock. They duck into the mess hall. The killer comes back to the mess hall. They all hide. Amber in one place and Brad and Sloan in another. He enters. Brad can kind of see what's going on. Killer's about to go for Amber when we hear the nurse off screen. Killer heads off screen, unclear where. Nurse enters the mess hall. Brad can see her from the waist down. We hear a cry, her legs go rigid, and we see blood pouring down her legs. Brad is traumatized. We don't see the rest of the murder, just hear it. Cut to Brad's POV, and we see her mangled body getting dragged off screen. They eventually escape and go to the cabin. Vanessa opens the door and they scramble in. They take care of Amber's arm while she is still in shock. Vanessa tells them about the gun, so they decide someone to get the keys, while some stay to distract him. Vanessa is at Greg's corpse while the rest are keeping watch. She gets the keys and unlocks the gun. She then goes back to the group and gives the keys to Brad. They try to get Kirby's attention, but she's not moving, but she's still alive. They get into the car and Sloan drives away. Brad is shaking with rage. They're going along the road. Lots of turns until they see the killer. Brad urges her to hit him. He jumps out of the way, she skids off the road and hits him, goes flying into the road. Truck falls over, front is smashed. The killer isn't dead. They scramble to get out of the car as he comes for them. He grabs Amber, tears her through the broken windshield, grabs her head, and crushes her skull. Sloan and Vanessa leave the truck while Brad unloads into him. The few shots that hit do nothing. He just keeps coming. Brad then flees back to camp with the girls. The killer is slower now. Back at the camp, it starts to rain. The killer comes staggering up the road. He goes to the campfire. Brad comes up behind him and jams an axe into his shoulder. The girls are hiding. He falls into the campfire. He gets up with his arm on fire. Instead of doing anything, the killer staggers off into the rain. He enters the dark woods, and the fire eventually goes out. They go to Duckworth's cabin to check for more bullets, and there aren't any. They're in defeat. Sometime later, they ultimately decide to leave on foot despite the consequences. They decide to go around the lake and shortcut through the woods to get to town faster. They try to get Kirby's attention to come back to land, but she doesn't want to. Brad says they'll bring help, but Sloan wants to save her. She tries to get her to come to shore, but she's too scared to do anything. Cut back to Vanessa and Brad. They see the killer by the cabins. They run into the boat shed. Sloan sees him too and ducks into the marshy grass of the lake near Weezer's body. She plays dead. The killer is dragging Duckworth's body. He proceeds to beat his head with a fiery log for good measure. He sees Sloan. He's inspecting her, trying to see if she's dead or not. But then, a splash in the lake. He looks up, sees nothing. Kirby jumped in to distract him. He grabs Weezer's corpse, goes underwater. Kirby is now back on the floating deck. Sloan warns her that he's coming for her. Kirby sees the bubbles underwater, which go under the deck. She says a prayer, jumps off, then swims for shore. She makes it a bit, but then she's dragged under. She is being dragged further and further down the lake. She sees all his victims suspended at the bottom of the lake. She screams. He clutches her face, cuts to the surface, and we see the lake run red. Sloan runs towards the boat shed, stating they have to go. She tells them what happened to Kirby and who the killer really is, the boy who drowned in the lake, how he can't die because he's already dead. They don't really believe her, but they have to head out before it's too late. They take the shortcut through the old grounds and woods. They hear him following them. They sprint for the woods. It's becoming nighttime. Still raining. They stop for a sec, but they hear him. Gotta keep going. They reach a back door of a house. We see Linda King come to the door, the eccentric woman from earlier. They enter her house and call 911. While Vanessa is on the phone, Sloan asks Linda if she has a car. But Linda brings out a shotgun with birdshot. Think it would scare him, but Sloan assures her it won't. Then, Linda notices the charm bracelet on Sloan's wrist. Before she can really ask her about it, the killer comes into her backyard and kills her dog. Everyone is panicking except Brad. He wants to fight him. Sloan tries to convince him otherwise, but Brad wants to. He comes bursting into the house. Vanessa starts to have another asthma attack, still on the phone, and much more severe. Brad goes for the killer while he bludgeons Linda with her artificial arm. Sloan gets a butcher knife. She stabs him with it over and over. He then grabs her by the neck and slams her against the wall. Linda, still alive, stabs him in the back of the knee. He proceeds to crush Linda's skull, still holding Sloan by the neck. Brad shoots him in the neck, which does nothing, but he manages to drop Sloan. He then axes his knee. He falters, tries to grab the machete, but Vanessa takes it while still in the middle of her attack. Brad and Sloan start stabbing again. He grabs Sloan's throat again. Brad grabs a nail gun and shoots him in the back multiple times. He jolts, and Brad shoots the last one into his head, loses grip on Sloan. Sirens are heard in the distance. The killer is moving weakly and notices the charm bracelet, moves for it with a childlike innocence. But then Brad grabs a fireplace poker and stabs him in the eye and through the head. Brad thinks he killed him, but Sloan doesn't believe it. The police arrive. Cut to Vanessa battered and bruised with an oxygen mask. She'll live. She's in the back of an ambulance in town with Brad and Sloan. Main Street is very busy with police and paramedics. The horror is over. Sheriff comes over and is shaken up. He asks about them to his deputy. Vanessa states that they killed him, but Sloan still doesn't believe it. Sheriff comes over and tells them no one was left alive at the camp and that they'll be taken to the hospital. The sheriff asks why this all happened, and Sloan states that she thinks it's because they trespassed onto the old Camp Crystal Lake, or that they were disrespectful, or that they remind him of the counselors that didn't watch him when he drowned. stating her theory that he thinks he was the boy who drowned in the lake. But the sheriff tells her otherwise. Brad thinks it was just some redneck on drugs. Sheriff states that the killer is dead, but Sloan still doesn't believe it and says his work isn't finished. The morgue van containing the killer drives away. The sheriff thinks Sloan is delusional. He can't recall his name though, the boy who died, but Sloan states his name is Jason Voorhees. Right then, he bursts out of the back of the van, bigger and ready to kill, holding a bone saw. They're all in awe. He goes for Brad, running. Cop tries to stop him, gets his throat slashed. He then takes Brad and saws his skull in two. Sheriff is shooting Jason. He turns and kills the sheriff with the saw. Cops are shooting. Sloan and Vanessa get out of there with the help of the deputy, who soon gets killed. Jason goes for Sloan, who goes into the back of the sheriff's car. Trapped because police car. Vanessa is staying down. The cops are shooting and Jason lays waste to them all. Vanessa trying to get away from the mayhem, but she can't leave her behind. Sloan tries to get out, but can't. Jason is still killing. Vanessa manages to free Sloan before getting her head bashed into the window, going limp. Sloan closes the door again, and Jason punches the window, grabs her while pulling her hair out of the car. He pins her to the car, ready to kill. Then she calls his name. He hesitates, but still wants to kill. She then gives him the charm bracelet, which she figured out was Pamela's. Jason sets the saw down, while Sloan pleads with him, tells him that he can stop and be with his mother. She takes off the mask. Swollen, gray, and baby-like. His expression is of crazed glee, but still not going to let her live. He grabs the saw and is about to kill, but Vanessa shoots him with a 12 gauge. She's shooting him like a badass. Sloan gets away and grabs a pistol, shooting Jason while backing away. Other cops join in and they head for a car. They get in, Vanessa starts the car. Jason goes after them and is in front of the car. She hits Jason full force, then brakes and runs him over. Sloan says, "Fuck you, Jason," and they drive up Main Street. They look back to see Jason getting up and putting his mask on. They drive away. Shot of them, exhausted, battered, been through hell, but alive. Cut to Jason. Massive amounts of bloodshed. Cops, bystanders, and paramedics. Jason looks around, nothing more to do, and heads back to wherever he came from, walking off into the sunrise. Cut to black, and Friday the 13th comes up in bold letters. Then, there is a post-credit scene. It's the dead of winter, in the snowy town of Crystal Lake. It's now a ghost town, abandoned, except for a single set of boot prints. Fade to black. I cannot tell you how much I absolutely fucking adored this script. Out of all the scripts I've read this month, this has to be my absolute favorite. Meltdown was reigning for a while, but this was just a magnificent script that took the #1 spot. Why, you may ask? Well, Antosca's script is just one of those times where he manages to understand everything about the Friday the 13th franchise. What is this franchise? Just a guy, although originally a gal, killing teens, and you maybe get to see some boobs and asses. That's honestly it. With the original remake, you had that, but the fact it was the 12th movie in the franchise, with so many repeats of the formula, with doing only tiny tweaks to make it seem like new, like fighting a telekinetic or going into space, it felt stale. Even though from what I've seen, it's really not that bad because it's Friday the 13th and half these movies in this franchise are awful. But with this movie, it manages to take all the best things from this franchise, as well as understanding the great simplicity of it and making it seem so refreshing. It doesn't try to reinvent the wheel. It knows what it is, and that's what makes it so good. It very much reminds me, in its idea and premise, of Bumblebee in a way. While Michael Bay tried to make Transformers sexy and cool and be a CGI fest, he didn't get what made Transformers so good in the first place. With Bumblebee, it takes it back to the original era and it drenches it in the time that the original movie/franchise was released. It goes back to the 80s and makes it feel like an 80s movie while also remembering what made it good in the first place. And Antosca's script does that to a T. Takes it back to the 80s, makes it feel like an 80s movie, and it has that charm that we come to love in this franchise. Even some of the worst movies in the franchise manage to be enjoyable in a certain area, minus 8 and 9. On top of that, Antosca manages to do something with this franchise that nobody has really ever done before. He gave a shit. Say what you will, but the original movie was made to capitalize on Halloween, and then the rest of the franchise just became a producer's wet dream. Cheap to make and an easy profit. Even with that, he clearly loves this franchise enough to still make a script that is a giant love letter to this franchise, and it's very clear the way he talks about it, how much he loves and respects it. It would pretty much be the H2O of the Friday the 13th franchise, with it being its greatest hits all rolled into one, like H2O is described as. That's all general stuff, though. In terms of the content in it, I loved what he did as well. The characters are genuinely fleshed out, memorable, and so fucking likable. It reminded me a lot of Alien in a way. He wrote these characters and built them up in a way that you didn't really know who was going to live or die, just like Scott's original masterpiece. And they're all so likable that when the killing did start, I kinda wanted to stop reading because I didn't want to see these characters that I came to love eventually die. But luckily, Antosca wrote the script so well that I couldn't put it down. On top of that, I also really like how Jason became a mysterious and creepy killer again. Part of the creepiness of the first 4 movies in the franchise is that Pamela and Jason were treated like a real and genuine threat. In the first movie, you never see Mrs. Voorhees killing people, and there was a decent amount of suspense there. I'm not a big fan of the original movie, but it did manage to do that well. Then with the sequels, you didn't really know who it was in the second movie, since Mrs. Voorhees died. And then in 3 and 4, he became this supernatural entity and was eventually killed by his own past through Tommy Jarvis. He wasn't even in the 5th movie. The 6th movie was more of a meta-horror comedy. The 7th he fought against the Carrie clone. 8 was boring. 9 was way too ridiculous. Jason X, he was brought into fucking space. And Freddy vs. Jason is more in its own ballpark. Then the remake was just stale and boring, from what I've heard. With this, Jason isn't even technically named until the last 10 or so pages of the script, as well as the fact that I think this is the first time we've ever seen Jason run. I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen any of these movies, so I could be wrong on that one, but the fact that we see a slasher villain run is pretty damn cool, and it honestly makes him scarier. Then the kills are also pretty great. Very bloody and brutal. Reminded me a lot of Halloween 2018 in a way. But here it makes sense, since Jason was always monstrous and brutal, while Michael was more of a ninja than anything. The only bad thing I have to say about this script is that the climax goes a bit too modern. What do I mean by that? Well, with a lot of horror remakes, we see the body count go to astronomical levels because, well, we've seen them do smaller body counts already. And in a world where violence is kind of the norm, they have to constantly outdo themselves to still be considered scary, like with the My Bloody Valentine movies. Perfect example. In the original, the reason that this town stops their Valentine's Day parties and almost becomes a shell of its former self is because 2 people were killed. In the remake, almost 24 people. Like, is that really necessary? With the climax, it does kind of go down that path. Even though Jason is more of that brutal monster, I still felt it was too much. I also, at first, didn't like the idea of it being in 3D because I felt that there was no point. But then I realized that it also added to the charm of it feeling like an 80s movie, since that's what it's trying to do. So I became at peace with that, even though I don't totally love it. With that though, and outside of that, I thought it was fantastic. The characters were extremely well written. Jason is more of a threat. The kills were great and brutal. It had some good twists, and had some good bits of comedy too, whether that be jokes between characters or little sarcastic quips Antosca sprinkled in throughout his script. Plus, I love the idea of the sequel. The fact that Jason went to fucking space before we got a Friday the 13th movie set in the winter just goes to show how ridiculous this damn franchise is. But that honestly sounds like a really rad idea. I actually implore you to read this script. Don't just skim it or something like that. Really read it. If you're a Friday the 13th fan, a horror fan, or just a fan of reading scripts, please read it. It's nothing short of absolutely terrific.